Women Making Waves.
Susie, would you have the bravery to start a business on your own from scratch? Say you came up with a great idea, would you have the guts to just carry it through? What do you think? A business idea?
Yeah.
I'm just sounding you out here.
Yeah, you are,
to
aren't
see
you?
if you're going to be a millionaire.
Yeah, I mean, I have often thought about, wouldn't it be nice to have my own business? I think a lot of people have good ideas, but the most important thing about having a business or good idea is to follow it through. And it's hard work, isn't it?
It is. And I think a lot of the time we think it would be great to have our own business because we haven't got other people telling us what to do. But probably that would be even worse if you're the one who's got to tell other people what to do. Once you start getting staff in, that might be not quite so good either. It certainly takes a certain type of people, but some people are just great at it, aren't they? They just kind of set forth, they've got this idea in their head and they run with it. And they've got the bravery and the foresight just to go ahead and do it.
I think that most people that are successful thrive on it. Part of your journey about having a new business or a startup is that you're going to have some really down moments. I don't think anyone has ever had a perfect journey. They've all had their moments where they've come to a crossroads, haven't they, in that journey and thought, do I move on? Do I give up, or do I move in a different direction? And I mean, I talk about it as if I can write it on a paper and it would sound very methodical, but it's not, is it? It's hard work.
But circumstances a lot of the time as well. It's what's thrown at you. But I don't know. It is something that I kind of see myself able to do. My family, my parents and grandparents had their own businesses. And so they obviously had the nerve to do it. And I've never done it, really. I've always been employed. I've always made my money through employment. Kind of interesting.
I mean, have you had ideas that you wanted to move into something?
No, and I think that's half the battle.
Yeah.
I've never had that big, bright idea, that gap in the market, that light bulb moment where you think, wait a minute, nobody is selling lemonade that's flavoured with nettles or something, and I could do that, nettles and curry lemonade.
Yeah, well,
I think that would be a great idea,
wouldn't it?
Susie.
Yes.
I'm going to talk you into going into business. We'll get a little van and we'll go around selling curried lemonade. How about that?
I don't know what to say, Linda, but I don't.
I think people would try it.
They would try it.
Maybe only the once. Maybe only the once.
Exactly.
But the world's a big place. If everybody bought one bottle, we'd be millionaires. I think this is the way to go.
Well, that's right. It would be the way to go. I don't know what to say to you, Linda, but I don't think it's going to work.
A lot of people say that to me. I don't know what to say to you. And that's how a lot of comments start with those words.
But even the most successful people that have continued on their journey and made it really good have gone through all these sort of stumbles. And obviously we have two interesting women who have done just that, haven't they?
We have indeed. Very interesting entrepreneurs today. We have Niamh Eadie, she's done a lot of things actually, but she has got right into property as well as running another kind of business all at the same time.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting woman.
And Inge Hunter, oh my goodness, what a journey. What a journey. Selling cocktails at 17 and then building a tech agency as well. I mean, that's why we're talking about journeys to get to where you are now. And these two women have got some fascinating things to tell us about their journeys to a very successful business.
They do. Some real insights coming up.
You're listening to Women Making Waves radio show and podcast, brought to you by Susie Thorpe and Linda Ness. This show is all about women doing extraordinary things.
Our guest today is Niamh Eadie, who is a most unlikely builder. Founder of Professional Plus Solutions, a consulting company focused on the legal services market, Niamh has a passion for property development and shows other people how to make money from doing the same. So how do you get from having a master's degree in IP and IT law and a degree in mathematics and computing to developing buildings? Well, let's find out. Welcome to Women Making Waves, Niamh.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Now, I'm assuming from your accent that you grew up in Ireland.
I did indeed. I was born and reared in Dublin many, many years ago and came well-trodden path after university. I headed to London, where most of my friends had also headed. Yeah, and it was a great place to be when I was young, free and single in London. And I started working for some of the big consulting firms in London, firms like Capgemini and PA Consulting Group at the time.
I was just thinking, as you were saying that, it's a Scottish and Irish thing, isn't it? If you haven't lived in London for some part of your career, then, it's kind of unusual.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you worked at Logica. Was that in Ireland after you finished at Trinity College?
No, I worked in Logica in London. That was the job I got straight out of university. They did, I don't know if it's still called that, but they did what they call the milk round years ago, where they'd visit universities and interview students and offer them jobs. And yes, they came to Dublin and hired a wonderful hotel and wined and dined us and talked about the advantages of coming to work in London. And back then, Logica was a reasonably new company. And yes, I got one of their coveted jobs and packed my bag and went to work in London for Logica. And it was really fun times. I really enjoyed my time there, actually.
Niamh, I mean, it's incredible. Well, it's not incredible. People do move on, obviously, from university, but not only do you come from, a place where you're born and grew up and then you come to London. Do you think you're brave? Do you think you're one of many brave people that come over and sort of start jobs in London? So, is London very different to Dublin? Do you think they're very similar or?
Well, back when I moved, which was, kind of the early 90s, London was very different to Dublin back then. The Dublin of today is not the Dublin that I grew up in the 70s, 80s. Dublin now is a very forward-thinking cosmopolitan city. Back then, it wasn't so much, whereas London obviously was a great city to go to. However, there is a big tradition in Irish universities to travel during the summer. It's quite different to going to university in the UK. I think in the UK, people tend to go away to go to university and then come home in the summer. Whereas in Ireland, you tended to go to the university that was in your nearest city. And obviously I grew up in Dublin, so I went to university in Dublin. But there was a huge tradition of travelling during the summer. So I spent most of my summers in New York, actually, in the US as a student.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And again, it was great fun. And when you say, do you have to be brave and courageous? At the time, it didn't seem brave and courageous. Now that I have teenage and university-age daughters myself, I think, good Lord. Of course, we went to these places with no mobile phones. I remember being there for over a week, having flown into Boston and not found a job or accommodation, phoning my parents, reversing the charges on the phone so they'd accept the call, to tell them everything was absolutely fine, despite it not being fine. But obviously they wouldn't have heard from me for over a week. They waved me off in Dublin airport and, I landed in Boston or New York. I went to both.
It's really funny you mentioned about reverse charges. I was having a conversation with my own daughter about 2 weeks ago about reversing charges, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Absolutely no idea. And I felt pretty old explaining it. But you're absolutely right, Niamh, aren't you? That's what I mean about being brave, because I don't think this generation, gosh, I can't believe I'm a parent saying this, we don't really appreciate how brave we were in those days, in the sense that you went off and you said goodbye to your mum and dad and that was it, you were off. And if you got into trouble, you had to sort it out, basically.
You did, yeah, absolutely. You had to sort it out because there was nobody to pick you up. When I think now of life with smartphones, etc., you just couldn't imagine life without a smartphone now. In fact, I've had a good example of it today because my husband Duncan has gone to China with my daughter Olivia, who is fencing there, and his phone didn't work when he landed in China. And luckily, Olivia's phone did work, because I had sorted that one out before she left. But he was completely incapacitated without having a smartphone. So yes, we headed off into the unknown without any way of connecting back to home or even just to find a job. I can remember setting up camp with my two friends in the lobby of a hotel, because we could use their phones, which of course were, pay phones, in the lobby of a hotel, trying to find, jobs and accommodation using a newspaper. That's how you did it.
That is how you did it. And I think you're right. And I would be horrified if my daughter did some of the things that I did when I was her age. Set off to be an au pair, didn't like the job, so left, travelled around, found another au pair job. When I think about it, oh my goodness.
I know. Now all you have to do is go on to Find My iPhone and you know exactly where they are.
Yes, that's right.
Exactly. And thank goodness, just as well.
Yes.
So you did what, 6 or 7 years consulting. What kind of consulting were you doing, Niamh?
Oh, so it's funny, isn't it? When I worked for Logica, it was more we worked on projects. So I worked on a project for Jersey Telecoms, for example. Logica had a contract with Jersey Telecoms to develop a new billing system for their telecoms company. So I was very much in the development arena, writing computer programs, which I didn't particularly like, nor was I particularly good at it. So I would rather be a project manager, was what I wanted to be, or more of a consulting, looking at the business requirements, things like that. So that's why I left Logica in the end. So it was PA Consulting Group that I moved to at that time, and got into consulting. And then consulting, and I think it's probably the same now, it could be anything. You arrived into an organisation and they would say, oh, we've won a contract with the Ministry of Defence, or we've won a contract with the Metropolitan Police, and we need you to go and speak to them about their requirements. Could be for anything, any system that they were going to implement. And you had to get out there, find your feet, keep your head down for the first few weeks until you worked out exactly what was going on, and then you got on with your consulting. And it was a great learning curve for me, because you were rarely comfortable. You were never in your comfort zone. You were very much out of your comfort zone initially. But then you learned on the job, and very quickly, became a useful resource to these organisations. But in the early days of each assignment, it was very much, learn on the job, which was never a very pleasant situation to be in, but a good grounding in life in general, I think.
And of course, they can chuck you out at a moment's notice if they don't like you or they think you're not for a good fit. That would be that. I guess
exactly.
They just get back to your consulting company and say, no, we don't want her tomorrow.
No, we don't like her. She's no good. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Yeah.
Niamh, were you married at this stage with children, or was this before being married?
So, no, well, when I came to London, I wasn't married. I was young, free and single. I thought I'd come to London for a couple of years, and I had grand notions about going back to New York as a much more qualified and highly paid consultant, rather than some of the menial jobs I did as a student, or indeed, go back home to Dublin. But I met an Englishman, and that put paid to all of that. Yeah, we got married in 1995. So in London I stayed. My eldest daughter was born in 2003, and my second daughter was born in 2007.
In the middle of all this, you founded a professional services company yourself in 1999, Professional Plus Solutions, which is still going to this day, isn't it? You still head that up.
It is indeed. Yeah. It's gone through a few different kind of iterations, only because of a kind of, as you say, my lifestyle changed. But once I left the main consulting companies, I got a job working for a new startup, a firm that came from New Zealand to start up in the UK. They were a firm called Keystone Solutions, and they were selling time and billing software to law firms. And so they came to the UK. I applied for a job there, and I was their first employee outside of the kind of New Zealand founders and went to work there. It was a really great move for me at the time. Whilst I enjoyed my time at, the large consulting firms, I was an entrepreneur at heart. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. My father had his own business, and, my grandparents had businesses before them. So I kind of knew I would always forge my own way. And Keystone gave me that transition because it was a new startup company. And, I was thrown in at the deep end to do all sorts of things, sales, marketing. I didn't do any software development. That was all done in New Zealand. But, consulting, project management, anything that needed to be done.
And did it feel like taking the plunge then in 99? You left Keystone and started your own company? Or was it just, right, the time's right now, I'm going to do it?
The time was absolutely right. So what had happened with Keystone was Keystone were very, very good at developing software. They developed that software back in New Zealand and had managed to sell it to quite a number of large law firms in the UK. What they were not particularly good at was the implementation side. So I saw an opportunity. They had 5 or 6 projects on the go that were clearly struggling. And I could see that there was a better way of doing it. And so I left, set up Professional Plus, and became the implementation partner, effectively, to help them implement. We became almost like an independent implementation organisation. So it was an easy enough transition for me that, I spotted the opportunity, took it, and it worked out. It was definitely a good time to jump at that point. Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by people that start their own business, and I get the impression it's an absolute hard slog, because whatever you try to do, it's your business, so you're almost doing it 24/7. And was there a time in your journey where you felt, oh gosh, I don't think I can do this, or I'm having a bad day or a bad moment? Was there something that sometimes thought, I don't want to do this anymore? Or did you find
many times.
Do you know what? I'm really glad to hear that, because you were sounding too perfect.
No. There's definitely good days and bad days, and good months and bad months. And I mean, one of the first things was, obviously, this company got set up in 1999 on the crest of a .com wave, which very quickly crashed. So it's been through many ups and downs, and many changes in how I've operated the business as well. When you think back in 1999, you needed an office, you needed a phone system, you needed desks, chairs, that was the way you set a business up. If you didn't have a physical office, you weren't a proper company. Whereas you don't need that anymore. I do have an office, but I effectively run my business from my phone and my laptop, and I could run that from anywhere in the world. So running a business has changed dramatically, and some of the things that set you apart as a proper, in inverted commas, business are no longer required. So the company's been through, many iterations. Initially, as with most startups, I did anything and everything. So, I was the person out working on the projects. I was winning the work, doing the work. I did have, other consultants who worked with me, etc. But a lot of the high level project management work, etc., I was on site doing it. A couple of things changed that, and it was a good change. At the time, it seemed hard and tricky. One of them was having my daughter. In 2003, I had to take a bit of a step back first just to have her, although I did drive myself to my own cesarean.
Crikey. Oh, wow.
Well, it was carefully planned, obviously. It could fit in with the project plan. So, she was born. I went back to work kind of 4 days a week instead of 5 days. I found that I could not do the hours that I would have done before on site, etc. So I had to very much change the model in terms of not working on site, not working on the projects. And it was good because it made me focus more on the business and, to get out of doing the day-to-day stuff. My problem at that point was I knew too much about the software because, of course, I'd come out of Keystone at that point. I knew the software, I knew how to implement it, etc. So I knew an awful lot. A bit later on in 2007, I signed a partnership agreement with Elite, and I knew very little about that software. And that again made me take a step back from the business. And by that stage, I'd had my second child, where I now was entirely reliant on other people to do the work. And my role became, signing partnership agreements, finding the work, finding the consultants, etc. So it changed, and for me, for the better, because I was more in the driving seat than I was the mechanic, as it were.
As a leader, you probably need to do that as well, step away from the detail. And that's what makes the business successful. Yep. So you're running this very successful business, but in 2010, you start a most unlikely builder. How on earth did you get to that, Niamh?
So a couple of things there. So obviously we'd been through the financial crash. So, yet another downturn that meant that, we had to be very lean and careful with the business. I think I had two realizations then. One was that all of my income was coming from this one source. Whilst it wasn't particularly affected by the economic doom and gloom that happened around 2008, 9, 10, etc. I was very aware that that could have been an issue, one income source. So I thought, well, I'm going to need another income source. The other thing that a lot of small business owners, I think, will resonate with is when you work for large corporations and large companies, they have corporate pensions, whatever form they take. As a small business owner, you don't really do much of that. That kind of gets put on the back burner. And so I was very aware that A, I had one income source, and B, if I stopped working in that, there would be no income. And if I didn't start doing something quite quickly about having a pension, I wouldn't have one. And so I had always had an interest in property. My father's business he owned a mechanical engineering firm. So I was aware or au fait with the building trade, although, I'd had no involvement with it. I was also a bit of an accidental landlord. Property that I'd lived in London and, moved out of, didn't sell, moved on to the next one, rented it out. So I was a bit of an accidental landlord and quite liked that idea. So I did feel that property was the way I would go, but I didn't know an awful lot about it other than buying a buy-to-let flat. And I thought there must be a better way of doing this than, buying one flat, putting a deposit on it and then saving up for years and years to get another deposit to put on another buy-to-let flat. I thought there must be a quicker way. And so, that's when I started to investigate property development as a route to all of those things.
At what point did you think, actually, crikey, I am equipped to do this. This can happen? Because a lot of people don't realise they have lots of transferable skills. And what would be your advice to so many people like you?
I often say to people, I don't really do anything. I don't do anything in my building company in that I don't build. I'm not an electrician. I'm not a carpenter. I'm not a roofer. I don't have any of those skills, but what I do is pull the whole thing together. And that's what I do in my consulting business. And so it was those skills that were transferable. A building project is very similar to a technology project. You have a set of requirements, somebody has to go and build it, somebody has to implement it, and it has to be finished at the end, and somebody has to live in it or use it. So they were very similar types of projects. And I just slotted into that role. And it's all about getting the right people, the people who have the right skills to do the things that need to be done.
And was that a worrying thing to do? Because presumably you had to put down quite a lot of money to buy the property. Was that quite a scary thing to do the very first time you did it, when you'd no, hands-on experience yourself?
It was, yeah. And I often tell this story and people gasp when I tell this story, but it is easier than it sounds. My first project, as a builder, as it were, it was I bought 2 floors of office space, empty office space, and got planning on it for 14 apartments, built 14 apartments and sold them. And everybody kind of goes, why did you do that? Why did you not just renovate a 2 up, 2 down house as your first project? And I actually think it would be much harder to renovate a 2 up, 2 down house than what I did, mainly because you need to know far more of the detail in order to renovate a 2 up, 2 down house. Whereas the development of 14 apartments in an office building, in order to get planning on that, I had to employ the services of a planner. And his job was to pull together a planning application. And he said, well, you're going to need an architect and you're going to need reports about acoustics and all sorts of things. So the experts guide you through that process. Once I got planning, I then instructed a firm to help me put together a tender document to send out to various building companies. They managed the tender process. We selected a building company. They got on with the building of the apartments, and when they were finished, I handed it over to an estate agent to sell them. Now that's a very simplified version of it, but I got experts in to do all of those things, and my role was to find the deal, fund the deal, and make sure everybody did what they were supposed to do throughout the project. So it's not as complicated as you think it might be. But it was a little scary the first time I did it.
I can imagine.
It's scary every time I do it.
Talk about starting big. I mean, that is incredible, really.
Yes.
And you mentor other people who want to get into property development, I understand. How did that come about?
I got a lot of people who would come to me and ask me for help on various things. The funny thing is, once you start in a new industry, which, this was a new industry for me, people get to know who you are. It's a whole set of new people I got to know. I guess being a woman in construction as well, I was a bit of a novelty. So I did get people coming to me asking me for help on various things. And a few people had said to me, oh, would you mentor me? And initially I thought, oh, no, that's not really for me. But in fact, I really enjoy it. If you work with the right person who wants to make a difference, who has a set of skills that you see could be translated into, something like property. Yeah, it's very rewarding. I do really enjoy it, actually. I don't do a huge amount of it, but I'm also keen to get more women into construction, not necessarily the heavy side of construction. That's not what I do. But, I think women have great transferable skills into property. And now is a great time. Obviously the government want to build 1.5 million houses in the next 5 years.
Niamh, I'm interested in when you spoke about getting more women in property development. How different is it, the property development, from when you started your own business to how it is now? How hard is it now in the industry? Is there a much better communication? I mean, there's always this thing about builders and never doing the right job, or estate agents always having a terrible reputation. Do you think things have changed now in the building industry and property development? Do you think there's a more clarity and more sort of organisation getting better?
No, I mean, there's still cowboy builders, definitely. And I think at the moment construction is tricky. Post-COVID, the commodity prices obviously went through the roof. We've got a shortage of labour in the country. It's all very well for Labour to say they want to build 1.5 million homes in 5 years. We don't have enough people to build 1.5 million homes in 5 years. There are a lot of challenges to that. But again, that also leads to opportunity. But, prices are still high in commodities. We do have labour shortages, which again drives up prices for building. We have issues with our planning system in the country, which again, are being addressed. Planning is too slow and has too much red tape to jump through. But that's changing. And actually, I think planning is a great opportunity. Obviously, before you build anything, you have to get planning. Planning is the bit I like best. It is often what builders like least. It is uncertainty. There is uncertainty around planning. But I often say to particularly professional people that think they might like to get into property development or property in general, planning is a great way to do that, because you can make money from planning without ever putting a spade in the ground, and you're still working in property. And it's a discipline that builders don't like, so they like to buy sites with planning. So you could just do that bit. That niche, I think, is a great niche, planning, and it's a great niche for the next few years. In order to build 1.5 million homes, there needs to be 1.5 million planning applications.
Yes, that's a good way of looking at it. Oh, wow.
Yeah, whether that's repurposing an existing building or building on a site or, an infill site, every one of those will need planning. So one of the things I do a lot of is purchasing old disused buildings and repurposing them. So old schools, old care homes, empty buildings that have served a purpose and are now vacant. They make great development sites. But first of all, they make great planning opportunities. Take an empty vacant care home, which typically could be 10, 11, 12,000 square foot, and put planning on that to convert it into apartments. Somebody will buy that off you without you ever having to put a spade in the ground.
Thank you so much for chatting to us today. This has been absolutely fascinating, and a real insight into the world of property development as well. You certainly got me thinking. I always think of property developing as having to roll your sleeves up and with the 2 up, 2 down.
Oh Lord, no.
And it's always put me off.
Absolutely not.
There you go.
No, absolutely not. Which is why I'm a most unlikely builder. You don't expect somebody of my age to turn up on site. But yeah, I don't do any of the dirty work.
You're listening to Women Making Waves radio show and podcast, brought to you by Susie Thorpe and Linda Ness. This show is all about women doing extraordinary things.
From selling cocktails while homeless at 17 to running a thriving content agency with a team of 14, Inge Hunter's story isn't just inspiring, it's proof that grit beats the odds. Based in her hometown of Newmarket, she's built Clue content into a powerhouse by doing things differently. And today she's sharing her unfiltered journey with us. Welcome to Women Making Waves, Inge.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. So tell us your story. Firstly, how did you end up homeless at 17? What was behind that?
Well, a messy story, really. You don't end up homeless at 17 for no reason. So I don't tend to go into the details of it. I just had sort of family breakdown. One thing led to another, and I ended up on the steps at Whitworth House at 17 with a bag full of my stuff and care papers in the other hand. That's where my homeless journey began, I suppose.
That must have been really tough, actually. I'm imagining that it takes a lot of strength of character. So what did you do? You went from selling cocktails, I believe. Is that something that you got into at that point?
Yeah, so it's hard to thrive in that kind of situation. I was still attending college. I still wanted to go out with my friends. I still wanted to do all the normal things. I only had £4 a week to live on. So when you're put into homeless shelters, I don't think people quite understand. You still have to pay for things. Being homeless isn't free. You do get given benefits by the government, but you still have to pay for things like washing tokens, pay a little bit of rent, pay for your food, all those kind of things. And after that, I would only have about £4 a week to live on. But I needed more. I mean, for example, the bus to and from my homeless shelter and college was £3.80 day return, but I needed to be there 5 days a week. I could have walked, but I don't know if you know Cambridge very well. It's sort of Chesterton Road to Hills Road. It's quite a trek.
Yeah,
yes,
it is.
So I needed a way to make money, and there are all the obvious ways to make money when you're in that kind of a situation. I decided to sell cocktails. I knew someone who would give me alcohol on a sale or return basis, and in Cambridge you have May balls. You know the May balls that happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but they all have to queue up outside before they go in. And I remember sitting on the wall at the round church thinking, being really jealous actually of all them really lovely dressed up, like going into their May balls, everything was paid for, this sort of lavish lifestyle. And it was a real sort of, I suppose, sliding doors moment for me. I was on the track to end up at Oxbridge, going to Hills Road, come from what was sort of seen on the outside as a secure family situation, but it definitely didn't happen for me. So I decided that what they all needed in this moment, in that queue, was a cocktail. And I was going to give it to them. So I got this alcohol on a sell and return basis. I got some plastic milkshake cartons and Tesco bags, and I shook up some Long Island iced teas in my hostel and went up and down the queues selling Long Island iced teas for £15. And I'd be like, do you want one? And they were like, yeah. I was like, aren't you going to buy one for your friend? And so it gave me a real buzz, actually, to sell them. And and it sort of grew from there. So then I started doing it up and down the nightclub queues, and that grew into a mobile cocktail bar. But that was how I decided to survive in that situation, really.
You talk about the word survive, and Linda talks in the intro about true grit. Do you find that you sort of had that true grit about you at the beginning? Is that a sort of philosophy in you, Inge?
I think so. It's hard to pin down. I think when you look back at my life, there were lots of moments. Like I said, you don't end up being homeless with things being all rosy. So there were actually quite a few moments where my back was up against the wall quite often. So I think I learned survival a lot throughout my childhood and my life. But then there was one moment in that hostel on the first night where I was just on the floor. The floor's covered in burns, cigarette stains, blood stains. The bed was covered in blood from the girl before me who was self-harming. And and I just cried and cried and cried. And I remember there was sort of this, it's going to sound weird, another voice in my head that was like, okay, well, what are you going to do now? And in that moment, I decided to pick myself up and put myself to bed and then wake up in the morning. And ever since then, for a long time of my life, I had right, well, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? Kind of voice that was sort of pushing me forward. So I think sometimes when you say, if I had that survival, I think there was elements of it, but I think when you're pushed up against it, you really learn a lot about yourself.
Yes. And I think that's exactly what happened with you, isn't it? You learnt a lot about yourself in the sense that you had to.
Yeah, I did. And I had to at the beginning, but it was also quite fun once you get going. The strange thing about being in the homeless hostel is that actually everybody in that space was very entrepreneurial. It's just it wasn't quite directed in the right way. It sounds quite odd because people don't associate sort of entrepreneurship or thriving with homeless situations, but actually when you're thrust in it in a survival situation, there are plenty of ways to make money. You just have to figure out the right one for you. And I did get a lot of inspiration from some of the girls that were around me.
Yeah. No, I can imagine, because for some people there's a desperation to it as well. You've just got to kind of carry on and get there and make some money. But you were still going to sixth form at the time, I'm imagining, at this point.
Yeah, still going to sixth form. Yeah, the sixth form were great, actually. Very supportive of everything.
And then when you left sixth form, what was your next endeavour then?
I finished sixth form. The cocktails that I was selling grew into a cocktail bar. So I used to go around the bars in town and they would get approached by people saying, you know, can you do my wedding? Can you do my event? Can you do this? And I used to give them a cut if they would give me the booking. So they would take the details and then they send them over to me and I would go and do the booking. So I got a really banged up old car. I got a really, really heavy steel bar that looked great, but it was really heavy. And I started doing the same thing, I suppose, but just a little bit more professionally and commercially by taking it to events. You know, you get kicked out of the hostel when you're 18 because apparently you're an adult. So I did sofa surf quite a bit, but then my friend's mum sort of picked me up. It got a little bit hairy at one point, and she just sort of picked me up, took me back to her house, and I stayed there.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Tell me, Inge, the moment that you left home to be in the hostel, you said you were inspired by lots of people in the hostel. Do you find that hostels get a bad reputation? Do you think they are more than what you think they are sometimes?
I think so. I think it's a double-edged sword because, like I said, they're all very entrepreneurial. It's just directed in the wrong way. One of the things that I'd like to do, the plan is to exit my company at 40 and turn around and invest money into people who are perhaps in those situations but have a real way of generating legitimate money. So they get a reputation for the kind of businesses that go on, but I think that when you actually look at the people, they're often doing entrepreneurial activities out of survival. It might be the only thing that they know or understand, but actually there's a lot of skill there in terms of like selling, cash flow management, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think if you can look beyond the obvious, you'll see people who are actually highly capable.
But you ended up at Kingston University. How did that come about?
So I finished college, I took a gap year, not a gap year, like everybody else, a gap year, definitely working. So I was, in that year, like I said, I was growing the mobile cocktail bar. I moved into my friend's mum's house and they encouraged me to continue with university. So I was going to go and do medicine. I did study biology, chemistry, psychology and maths at sixth form. But I decided to take up psychology. In that year, I sort of grew my business in Cambridge. I then went to Kingston to study psychology. It went well, but I already had a thriving business in Cambridge. So my mobile cocktail bar had developed into an events planning company. So I used to go to events and I'd be the only organised person there. So I used to take on the whole management of the whole thing. So I did a year of Kingston, but I needed to move back to Cambridge really. So I then I tried to transfer my credits, they weren't transferable, but I decided to come back to Cambridge and finish my studies at Anglia Ruskin. I chose business management and marketing because I thought that would help me with my business. It was too academic for what I was doing at the time, but I was studying and working.
This sounds incredibly impressive, Inge, and I've done a degree, but I've done it when the children are older. But I still can't fathom how you have managed, and you obviously are very organised, but enlighten us how you have been, you organise and you run your own business, a successful business, and you're studying at university. And you're living in a friend's house. Yeah. And you've got admin and you've got financial commitments and you've got trying to find customers and you're trying to run your business at the same time. It baffles me. So just enlighten me. How did this all work?
Well, I also had a baby at uni too.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. This is more impressive as it goes along.
Yeah, I had a surprise in my second year. So third year of studying, second year at Anglia Ruskin. And she came in the holidays. And so I did my final year with my daughter. Actually, I didn't get involved at university in any of the extracurricular things. I didn't do any of the sort of socialising. From the outset, the point of university for me was to grow the business. So I was very focused on what my outcome would be. And then actually having my daughter, you know, you are very stuck at home when you've got a young child. I'd be breastfeeding and writing my dissertation, and my husband, you know, who's now my husband, would sit in the car with her while I was in lectures so I could come in and out. I think I just wanted to get it done. They did say, do you want to stop doing university? You've got too much going on. But I thought I would never go back to this. So let's just get it done. I did my dissertation actually on the viability of buying a cocktail bar because I was going to buy one of the bars in Cambridge. I had the money ready. But my dissertation told me it wouldn't be a viable thing, so I didn't.
That's fascinating. So you actually researched it thoroughly for the dissertation, killing two birds with one stone, actually, and decided that that wasn't going to be a viable. That's really interesting.
No, I actually went deep into the lease agreements of the university because it was a university-owned property, which pointed out that those may not be worth the return.
Yeah, I've heard they're quite steep.
They are long and inflexible.
We're in this situation where you're still doing cocktails at this point. You're finished your university. What happens next?
So I finished university. I did do another year or so of event management, but I decided because I had my young baby that I would pivot into wedding planning. At the time, I thought, right, financially, wedding planning, I can do 8 a year. I can charge this amount. That's great. It'll be really good for my time because I've got a family. But wedding planning is not easy.
Oh, surely.
Oh, yeah. Well, you think, you know, instead of doing constant corporate events and sort of every weekend doing a wedding bar event, I thought if I plan them, I can charge more. So I went into wedding planning. I still had the bar, but it was sort of being run by staff. And yeah, I focused on wedding planning. At the time, I was using Instagram a lot to pick up business. I was doing really well. I did quite a few years of wedding planning, and I managed to get to a point where I was doing good weddings. You know, they were dropping $500,000 on their wedding, and it would be in the Suffolk countryside with a shoot in the morning, a 4-day wedding, a oil broker's daughter type thing. But I think there's 5 years between my children. I had planned cesarean for my second through medical, not because I'm too posh to push, medical planned cesarean. And I remember coming out, I'd been out 2 hours, I had my laptop in the hospital, baby on my breast. I got a call from a bride saying, I can't decide between duck egg and baby blue cushions. Oh my God. It was a proper moment that will be etched into my mind, because she was buying 150 seat cushions for her wedding, and she couldn't decide between baby blue and duck egg. And she was lovely, and I should have really put my out of office on. But at that point I thought, what the hell am I doing? And that was my last wedding.
I did wonder if there'd be some kind of bridezillas in the mix, because you do hear that people just turn into horrors when they're sorting their wedding out.
Yes, at that point, it's all the mums and fathers who are paying for it, though. So you're basically project managing between parents and children. Yeah.
Inge, how did you then go from wedding planning to where you are now, Clue Content? How did that all begin?
Yeah, so because I didn't want to do weddings anymore, I moved into consultancy, really. So I had already been picking up clients in the industry asking me how I was getting these kind of clients, what I was doing with social media to grow my customer base and to grow the brand. And so I'd started consulting a few people, and I decided I would stop doing the actual weddings and continue to consult. And I did do consulting on social media and digital marketing for quite a while. I would consult anyone from corporates to SMEs to sort of thought leaders. And I was doing that really well. But in 2022, I was looking at social media and thinking, do you know what? This is a shit show. Because I can tell people over and over and over again what to do on their socials, but they just can't do it. Consulting's one thing, but actually watching people put it into practice is another thing. And so I decided in 2022 that I would set up a company that would just do it for people, because it's a lot. You have to make mini adverts every time you post on socials now. You have to have a whole team of production people. You know, social media management is a thing, but if you look at anyone who's in social media management, they're exhausted. I decided no one had a clue how to do social media, so I would call it Clue. So I give people a clue. And I set up and started it in January 2023. The plan was always to leave social media in a better place than I found it. So we started off with content creation. So we do 3 months of content for people in 3 days, and we give them the whole production team, but for the price of one person's salary. I already had the idea, but we sort of set that arm of the company up first, and then we've now released and launched our technology, which analyses social media data and tells you what to do, because no one has a clue how to do socials.
Have you found clients totally aghast at the difference made from not having a social media area to actually working with you?
Oh yeah, I mean you can see differences within one post when we post out for our clients. People get results very, very quickly. It's just keeping on top and keeping up with social media is hard, so that's what we do. And actually I'm now firmly in the camp of democratization of social media and taking away the power of all the data from the 6 men that sit at the top and redistributing it to the people that actually make the content.
Oh, that's interesting. Explain a bit more about that. That sounds really enlightening.
So when you create content on social media, you spend money on the people that make it for you, or you spend money on the tools that you use to make it. You also spend a lot of time to make your content on social media. But as soon as you post that onto social media, the data is owned by the people that own social media companies. And the 6 people that own social media data have accumulated wealth of 1.24 trillion, which is enough money to buy every single house in the UK. And they've done that through the harvesting of social media data, and they've harvested the social media data through the people that put time and energy into making it. Another word for this is exploitation. So similar to a coffee bean farmer who grows the coffee bean, but they don't get the same returns as Nescafe. It's literally the same thing. There is a lot of data on social media, a lot of data, but they purposefully make it hard so that you'll pay for ads, and the ads extend you to a group of people, but then the ads get more and more expensive to get the same ROI. But we all know social media works, and we all know we're doing it. So my technology draws on all of the raw data of someone's account, analyzes it. They give it a KPI. I want to either grow my awareness or I want to grow my conversion. What do you actually want out of your social? And it tells you what to do, so that eventually, it's backed by quite a lot of government organisations and accelerators, and they said, oh, what would you do if you were in a lift with Mark Zuckerberg? And I said, well, I'd turn around, I'd point at him in the eye and say, I'm the reason your ad spend's down 30% in the UK, because I think people should be able to understand what works and what doesn't.
So tell me then, with your business, what have been the challenges of your business so far then, Inge?
Right now, in particular, it is being a non-technical female founder in a very technical space. I've raised investment for the company, and the bigger the raises I go for, the less females there are that are in that kind of space. So I'm going for a Series A raise, and I'd really like a female fund, but there are only 70 in the UK and Europe that are available.
What do you mean only 70?
70 funds that are run by women.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
that's shocking.
And when they say run by women, it might be that there's just one woman on the board. So
right.
Yeah. And so that's tricky. I think it was last year only 1.24% of funding mine's in AI, so in the AI space went to women, of which I got some of that. It's really low. What used to happen was I used to find it hard for people to take me seriously because of the background I've come from, and I didn't have the network to kind of escalate myself. Now I've got the network and I've got the proof of concept, but now it's trying to push into circles that are very male dominated and closed off.
And you were mentioning that you find it difficult, especially as you're maybe from a non-technical background. Do you find that people are trying to kind of run rings around you in certain things and kind of use acronyms all over the place and all that?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Especially I do get invited to talk quite a bit and be on stage and panels, and then especially in the tech community, I'll come off a panel and they'll say, oh, so what stack are you using, what language, is it this, is it la la la. Now, I don't know, I pay people to know, but there's definitely a lot of trying to catch me out, a lot of it.
But that's the nature of being a founder and a CEO. You are managing these things, your ideas are there, and that's... I don't know if they would have asked that if it was a man.
No, would they? I'll bet they wouldn't, actually.
Well, they don't, you can see them.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Yeah, I also have been asked, I was going in for a pitch for money raise, and I was specifically asked, when are you planning on having children? I didn't mention it.
Oh, no, you are joking.
No, seriously, because they don't want to invest in me if because I'm 35, I'm of childbearing age, so they want to know where their money's going.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Oh, that's appalling. That's absolutely appalling. I don't know what to say to that, except I hope you told them where to go, but you couldn't.
No, I did.
Oh, you did? Excellent. Yeah.
No, I don't want money from someone like that.
No, quite right.
No, you're quite right.
You recently have been accepted into the Innovate UK. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that, Inge, as well.
It's fantastic. I've been working with them possibly coming up to a year now. I've got a really great advisor, Ruben, and it's a really collaborative community. They are really keen to put me forward for things. They're really keen to put me forward for it's not just grants as people expect it to be, but some of them are accelerators or supportive communities. And just to have the backing of Innovate UK is really affirming and special for me, because it means that actually there are people out there that think, no, this is a good idea, this is one to get behind. So it's been fantastic, actually.
You've also been Creative Entrepreneur of the Year. You were given that award at the Great British Entrepreneur Awards. That is really something, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the same one Stephen Bartlett won a few years ago. So I'm chasing him.
I think you could well overtake him yet, to be quite honest. Yeah.
Me too. We'll get there.
What's next in your agenda then? Where are you going from here? Have you plans up your sleeve?
Well, business growth is the main plan. The big plan is to exit at 40, like I said. So I've given myself maybe towards the end of 40, so 6 years, to really I feel about this company and the accessibility that it has to performing well on social and business growth for SMEs. I feel really passionate about it. I think it needs to be done. If it's not done by me, it would be done by someone else. So I want to do that and then exit at 40 and use the funds to reinvest back into girls like me, really, who have come from a difficult background but who clearly show some sort of entrepreneurial skill and see what they've got, really. So the big plan is that. The small plan is worldwide domination and telling Mark Zuckerberg where to stick it.
Yeah. And thank you very much for joining us today here in Women Making Waves. That's been absolutely fascinating.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it has been.
That's all we have time for today on Women Making Waves. Our thanks go to our guests, Niamh Eadie and Inge Hunter. We're always on the lookout to feature women living extraordinary lives, so please do contact us if you know someone that we should be talking to.
You can contact us via social media on X and Facebook at WomenMW or on Instagram at Women Making Waves. And you can also find us on Cambridge.radio or visit our website womenmakingwaves.co.uk, where you can hear all of our interviews.